Welcome.
My name is George Mann, and I'm the writer of Newbury and Hobbs, Witchwood, and Star Wars The High Republic.
This is Kevin Shinnick, writer of Star Wars Force Collector.
I'm Cameron Scott, one of the story architects of Star Wars The High Republic.
This is Dominic Pace, who plays Gekko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian.
Hi, I'm Claudia Gray. I write Star Wars books.
And you're listening.
And you are listening.
And you are listening
to Star Wars Comics in Canon. The Force is strong with this one.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 133. So my friends, here we are with yet another piece of High Republic content from Phase 2. I'm continuing that train, and we are doing something from Dark Horse this time, and it's a mini-series called The Nameless Terror. So in brief, if you haven't tuned in before, what I do is I go through the comics in question in chronological order. I give you the general plot details as we go through the comic, and then along the way I give you additional information on certain trivia, characters, species, interesting information, or connective tissue, which connects the comics to other Star Wars content, and obviously in the realm of the High Republic, there are a lot of connections. So a little bit of information about this comic before we delve in. It was written by George Mann. The artist is Eduardo Mello. The colour artist is Ornella Savarese. Issue number 1 was released February 22nd, 2023. Issue number 4 was released May 17th, 2023. And the trade paperback collection is due for release August 29th, 2023. And in case you weren't aware, I actually interviewed George Mann a couple months back. I believe I released the episode on the 4th of June on the YouTube channel of Genuine Chit-Chat, but also on the podcast feed as well. So make sure you listen to that because George does talk about these comics a little bit, and he talks about his wider intrigue into Star Wars, the High Republic, mythology, and all kinds of things. So it's a really, really great conversation, and if you check out the video on YouTube, you get to see our lovely faces while we're chatting. Now, I have tackled all of the Phase 1 High Republic content so far, and also I'm slowly making my way through all of Phase 2. I have tackled every Phase 2 book now, aside from Path of Vengeance, which I am currently reading, and then there's a couple of comics still left to go before we're finished with Phase 2, but details are in the description where you can listen to that, but there's also a playlist on YouTube called The High Republic, where you will find all of it. Now, Phase 2 of the High Republic takes place around 350 years before the Skywalker Saga, so it's approximately 382 years before the Battle of Yavin, which is before the attack on the Death Star in A New Hope. And Phase 2 is a prequel to Phase 1, so it's around 150 years before Phase 1, and Phase 1 was about 200 years before the Battle of Yavin as well. Now, what's interesting about this comic is this comic takes place simultaneously in Phase 1 and Phase 2. The framing story is set in Phase 1, shortly after the Rising Storm, and centers around the character Ty Yorrick, who's one of my favourites from Phase 1. While the flashbacks are actually set in Phase 2 of the High Republic, and they seem to be set around the time of the Path of Vengeance. It seems to be after Convergence and Battle of Jeddah, so Phase 2 is a bit shorter. I think the entire thing takes place over sort of 6 months to a year, and this takes place in the latter half of that period. And there are some connections to Path of Vengeance that I've been finding as I'm reading Path of Vengeance, but I'll get onto those more towards the end, and I'll give a little spoiler warning as well. Now, just to clarify with Ty Yorrick, if you haven't read The Rising Storm, I'd hugely recommend it because I think it's one of the best Star Wars books ever written, and it's probably my favourite High Republic book, joint with Path of Deceit, and I released my book review of that in November 2021, so you can go check that out. If you haven't read the book, you get a good understanding of my thoughts on the book, and then towards the end I give you a full plot overview on what happens, and then bouncing off that, there is a mini-series which was published by IDW Publishing, which is Ty Yorrick's origin story in a sense. She is a saber-for-hire, she left the Jedi Order when she was a Padawan, and there's a whole 4-issue mini-series about that, which was written by Cavan Scott. So if you want to hear more about Ty Yorrick's origin stories and things, either pick up the comics yourself, which obviously I hugely recommend, or listen to episode 87 of Star Wars Comics in Canon to get the full brief on what happened there. But with that all in mind, friends, let's delve into the first issue, and let's start with The Crawl. It is a time of great exploration. In an effort to unite the galaxy, the Chancellors of the Republic, working alongside the courageous and wise Jedi Knights, have dispatched dozens of Pathfinder teams into the farthest reaches of the Outer Rim. But it is also a time of great uncertainty. Communication is unreliable, and tall tales of mysterious planets and monstrous creatures abound. Prospectors and pirates roam the frontier, and the worlds of Aram and Arano are locked in a forever war. And on the far-off planet of Dalna, a new threat to the galaxy is beginning to emerge. So interestingly enough, that crawl is actually from Phase 2 of the High Republic, but the first wave. So that was in the first collections of content that was released, even though this actually takes place after that. But I wonder if the reason they kept the original crawl instead of the crawl for Wave 2, because Wave 2's crawl does, to a degree, not quite spoil, but it gives some information about some of the Wave 1 books and the Wave 1 content. And this is like a standalone story. It works without touching any other pieces of content. So I think they did that just to kind of show this is standing on its own. And you don't really need to know much about the other pieces of content of what's going on here. But obviously along the way, I'll give you a little bit more context as to what is going on in the galaxy at the time of this comic. But friends, let's delve straight in. So a bit more info on Ty Yorrick. Her full name is actually Tylera Yorrick. She is a Tholothian. So Tholothians are species that have been around in Star Wars for quite a long time. They were quite prominent in the prequels and in the Clone Wars. There was one of them actually killed in the Order 66 montage of Revenge of the Sith. I believe her name is Ada Gallia. And in some of the Maul-centric episodes in Clone Wars, there is another Tholothian that actually gets killed in quite a brutal way. So Tholothians have been about for a while. They are near humans. They just have head tendrils. That seems to be the main defining feature of them that makes them different. And Ty Yorrick had a master called Sibaba, which is detailed in Monster of Temple Peak, and she also has a purple lightsaber. So the comic starts with the framing story set in Phase 1 of the High Republic, and that is set after the Rising Storm. We know that because later on in one of the issues, Chloe mentions Elzar Mann, and Ty and Elzar met in the events of the Rising Storm at the Republic Fair on Valo. So Ty Yorrick's droid, Chloe, is a protocol droid. She's quite unique to other droids, kind of has like a domed head, but a more humanoid body. I'd say the closest droid we've seen to Chloe is probably L337, who is in Solo: A Star Wars Story. So at this point in her life, the way that Ty Yorrick makes her way in the galaxy is by monster hunting. She does that, and doing that gets her paid, and then obviously she can pay for fuel and stuff for her ship and food and etc. So Chloe is mentioning a number of monster hunting missions that they have been sent. Now, lots of people are quite jumpy about things because of the Nameless and the rumours around them roaming the galaxy. Then Ty recalls that she's actually heard that name before. Her master Sibaba, their master Corran, actually told him stories about it. So, here is that story. So the flashback goes to around 231 years before the Battle of Yavin, and that is after the events, as I said, of the Battle of Jeddah, of Path of Deceit, Quest for the Hidden City, and Convergence, and it takes place around the same sort of time as Cataclysm because Path of Vengeance is concurrent to a lot of the Phase 2 content, so this takes place around halfway through the Path of Vengeance, which is around the time of Cataclysm. So the flashback shows us a Pathfinder team. Now, Pathfinder team is a really interesting part of Phase 2 of the High Republic I've been really enjoying, and actually the junior novels delve into it a bit more, and the junior novel Quest for the Hidden City was actually written by George Mann, so that works out quite nicely. So Pathfinder team is generally made from 5 individuals, so you've normally got a droid that's with them, often a courier droid, but then the other 4 individuals is usually a Jedi Master and their Padawan, and then a pilot/engineer and a medic. So they go off into the frontier, they check planets if they're hospitable, if there's intelligent life on there, and they leave out communication buoys, so as people delve further into the Outer Rim and the frontier as it's called, these parts of the galaxy that Republic hasn't yet gone to, leaving these buoys means that when other people go there and tries to help certain systems, etc., the communications are active, because otherwise they have to send these courier droids, which is essentially a droid that gets a message and then just gets sent off in one direction to go and deliver a message to someone. They can be destroyed on the way, they can take a long time to get to places, whereas obviously as we know from the Skywalker saga, communications is like instantaneous, so even if you're like light years away from someone, you can still communicate with them instantaneously. So this era of the Republic being 350 odd years before that shows the difference in communication. So in this Pathfinder team, we've got a Bith Jedi called Zinith Tal. So a Bith looks like a stereotypical alien, and they're probably one of the most iconic aliens you may not know the name of. And that's because the Cantina band in A New Hope, they do the song, they are all Bith. So that band is called Figrin Da'an and the Modal Nodes, and the song itself is called Mad About Me. So Zinith Tal is speaking with a character called Rock. Now, Rock is an individual who has been through quite a bit of tragedy, let's be honest. They were in Quest for the Hidden City. So this is a mild spoiler for it, but Rupa Natani and her master Salandra Show find Rock, and he was with a Pathfinder team, and their entire team, including his Padawan, were killed by the monsters in Quest for the Hidden City. They do manage to save Rock, but obviously having his Padawan killed and the rest of his Pathfinder team, he is in a little bit of turmoil. So when we find him here, he's just kind of trying to collect himself a little bit. So he's speaking with a Zenith, and then an alarm sounds, and there is an unidentified ship that's approaching. So Rock and Zenith go to the cockpit and speak to the rest of the crew. So the rest of the crew is as follows. You've got Corran, who is the Jedi Padawan, and that is the person who grows up to become the master of Sababa, who is the master of Ty Yorrick. You've got Corran's master, who is Sula. She is another human, and she has a yellow lightsaber blade. I must add that Corran has a blue blade, and Rock has a green blade, while Zenith Tal also has a yellow blade. And also I forgot to mention that Zenith Tal is actually in the Battle of Jeddah briefly. Then you've got a pilot called Paco, who is a Nikto, and then you've got Ambar, who is a Nautolan, and she is the medic. So Nikto, they're a species that have been around in Star Wars for a long time. You'd have first seen them in Return of the Jedi. They're also in Clone Wars. There's a main character in the Resistance show. They're also in Mandalorian Series 3. There's one of the pirate gang members called Vane. He's a Nikto. But there are 3 subspecies of Nikto. I'm not going to delve into all that stuff here. But Niktos essentially have scaly, coarse skin. They have got facial spikes. They are humanoid. And they are from the planet Kintan. So to summarise, the Pathfinder team themselves is the droid X5, the Nikto pilot, Paco, the Nautolan medic, Ambar, and then Jedi Master Sula and her Padawan Corran. And with them is the female Bith Jedi, Zenith Tal, as well as the male human Jedi, Rock. So this unidentified craft comes towards their ship, they try and communicate to them, hear nothing, and then this other ship starts to fire upon them. So the ships get into a little firefight, the other ship decides to ram them, and then both ships crash into a nearby planet. Now, although the planet's air seems to be breathable, Zenith Tal is actually injured. They were injured in the crash, and it seems to be quite severe. The ship itself is unstable, the crew all manage to flee and run away, and then it explodes. However, Zenith needs some medical attention, so they decide to head to the other ship that rammed them because they can't fly home with their ship, and they need to try and help Zenith. We then notice that something falls out from the other ship, cracks open and hatches, but the crew don't see that. Now, throughout this comic, there's occasional moments where Ty and Chloe kind of cut through the tension and speak a little bit because Chloe, the droid, is getting quite excited by Ty's story, and there's a little bit of back and forth with them. I'm not going to delve into that too much because I think, again, I always recommend people pick up these comics, and little moments like that kind of add flavour to the comic and give you a reason more to pick it up, and they don't have a explicit impact on the story much, so there's certain points where I won't include those bits, but again, please pick up the comic where you can so you can hear that stuff. So this unknown ship that crashed and rammed into our lovely Pathfinder team has split into 2. So the crew decide to split up. Rock and Corran go to one part of the ship. So Sula, Paco and Amber find 3 dead members of the other ship when they go in there. And Sula notices that she senses something is amiss. Meanwhile, Rock and Corran talk about being a Jedi. There's some quite nice dialogue there and Rock's lost Padawan and things as they kind of head into the other part of the ship. Zenith's breathing is getting more and more shallow, and they keep moving her around, which is becoming too much for them, and Amber says, look, we need to find the medical evidence and we need to try and help them out. So Sula then tells Paco and X5 to stay with Zenith and Amber, while Sula tries to look around. As Sula is looking around, 3 members of the Path of the Open Hand start to shoot at Sula. She manages to easily deflect some of the bolts, flips over the room, disarms them, and then tells them to stand down. While this is happening, Rock and Corran are trying to restore the power in their half of the ship, but they note that their thoughts are being clouded by something. They can feel this strange emptiness and hunger trying to seek them out. Then a Weequay tries to attack Corran by launching himself off something with a weapon, yelling, "Die Jedi." Now, you would have seen Weequay before. Again, Return of the Jedi is where I think they debuted. There were some of Jabba's thugs were, and one of my favourite characters in Star Wars, Hondo Ohnaka, he is a Weequay as well. They are humanoid or human-like beings, but they have leathery skin and like facial spikes as well. They're not actually too dissimilar from Nikto, if I'm being completely honest with you. But this Weequay in question is called Kane. We then see that Sula is confronting the 3 Path members, and then they hear a thud and decide to run away. Sula is being heavily affected by this creature's hunger, and then Zenith is also writhing around in pain even though they are unconscious, and then Sula almost collapses. And that is where issue number 1 ends. So a little bit of information here. So, the Path of the Open Hand, they are seemingly the main antagonists from Phase 2 of the High Republic. They are essentially a cult, and they believe that the Force should be free. They believe that Jedi and other Force users should not wield the Force in any way, that the Force should be left to its own devices, and if you use the Force in one place in the galaxy, it means that the Force can't naturally help someone in another part of the galaxy. This theory has never been proven, and I think as an audience we're meant to believe that is not the case, especially from stuff we've seen with the Jedi and other Force users and things, but that's what the Path believe. Now, the Nameless is the term given to a group of creatures. The individual is known as the Leveler. So they were introduced in Phase 1 of the High Republic. They came to prominence in the Rising Storm book, and then they were also in Claudia Gray's The Fallen Star book as well. Then in the Marvel comics of the High Republic Phase 1, written by Cavan Scott, we got to see them in even more detail and specifically the effects that they have on the Jedi. And essentially they drain them of Force energy and calcify them, turning them in essence to stone, which often means they just fall and crumble to dust. So not much was known about them in Phase 1. We got a little bit of information about it, and Marchion Ro and his ancestors seemingly had some sort of way to commune with them or those sorts of things. I don't really want to spoil specifically, go check out all the Phase 1 content, it's fantastic. But Phase 2 is kind of showing the origins of them to a degree, and we get that with the Mother and the Herald and the way these nameless creatures have kind of come to being, which I'll go into a little bit more as this comic unfolds. So we move on to issue number 2, where it goes back to the framing story, where Ty Yorrick confirms to Chloe that although the members of the Path saw the Nameless, the Leveler, as some sort of monster, to Force users it was the worst thing possible because it consumes the living Force and specifically targets those who are Force sensitive. So back to the flashbacks, you've got Sula, who is weakened and disorientated from having some degree of a run-in with the Leveler. Paco finds her and takes her back to Amber and the unconscious Zenith, and then Sula explains the feeling of this being's hunger. Then the thudding around them continues, and then we get to see that Rock force pushes Corran out of the way of Kane attacking them, and Rock then quickly slices through the weapon that Kane was holding, and they then decide to bind Kane. Corran notes that he felt this wave of unease hit him just before being attacked, which may be one of the reasons why he didn't sense anything. And while this conversation is going on, Kane is just mocking the Jedi, blaming them for Jeddah, and notes that the path of the open hand are now the path of the closed fist. The path of the closed fist, it is detailed in Cataclysm, which I did the book review and plot overview for that only a few weeks ago, so go check that out, or obviously pick up the book because it is fantastic. But the path of the open hand were meant to kind of recruit people, and then the path of the closed fist has kind of changed the cult into more of a militia, more of an army. On the ship, we then hear even more thudding, and Paco and Amber need to try and help the Jedi out, so they decide to try and reroute power and try and electrocute the beast that's on the hull. So Amber asks Paco to help move Sula and Zenith to a more secure location, and then Paco can go out and try and reroute the power. We then see that Corran is trying to sort out a repeating distress signal to try and alarm people to the plight that they're in, but the comms are damaged. Rock then asks him to try and use the short-range scanner, so they do that so they can see where the Nameless Beast actually is. They then try and time it and then proceed to run to the other part of the ship where the beast isn't. Paco and Amber then manage to find a cargo hangar as well as a medkit for Zenith. Paco also finds the Nameless eggs, thinking that they're gemstones, which is quite a common thing. These Nameless eggs, they're purple, they're very large, they're much larger than like an ostrich egg or anything like that. They're bigger than the ball used in like football or /soccer for you American listeners, or even rugby. So it's quite a large thing. It would take two hands to pick it up, like quite a large vase almost. But yeah, they make me think of almost amethysts in a way. So Paco and X5 then go to sort the power out, and then the three Path members start a shootout before Paco shoots one of them and catches one of them who's named Geth in the shoulder. While this is happening, Rock and Corran, along with Kane and Binders, try and go outside so they can move into this other ship when the Leveler isn't really about. The Leveler then appears and jumps in front of Kane, and Rock and Corran leave, and Kane does not. Seemingly, Kane dies. So back to Paco. After he hit Geth in the shoulder with his blaster bolt, he then runs away, finds the power, and manages to reroute it as planned, and that electrifies the hull and then shocks the Leveler. Amber and Sula see the Leveler got shocked, as do Rock and Corran. And Rock and Corran use this opportunity to run. They go towards the hull, but they can't get in, so Rock starts to cut a hole in the side of the ship using his lightsaber as the Leveler starts to move and get up from that shock. So that's where issue 2 ends. We move on to issue number 3. So in the framing story, it's noted that Chloe is seemingly plotting something. Ty can tell, but it's kind of unsure on what it is, and Chloe is just palming it off, saying that they're just excited to see an Acklay. And so Ty continues with the story. Now, in brief, an Acklay is something that you'd have seen in Attack of the Clones. So in the Geonosis pit, where Obi-Wan, Padme, and Anakin are all fighting respective beasts, Obi-Wan goes against the Acklay. So the Acklay is approximately 3 meters tall. George Lucas described it as a combination between a praying mantis and a velociraptor with some features of a lobster put into it. They have 6 legs, they have a strong exoskeleton, and they are generally green. They're from the planet Vendaxa, and they're mentioned here and there in books and comics, but Attack of the Clones is the main place you'd have seen them. And just extra trivia for that Geonosis arena battle, the beast, which is like a rhino thing that charges at Anakin, is called a Reek, and the wolf hyena dog thing that attacks Padme is called a Nexu. But back to the flashback. So Rock does manage to cut through the hull with his lightsaber, gets Corin inside, and then Rock uses the force to push a really big crate into the way, and then the leveler slinks away after it realizes it can't get in. Corin and Rock have quite an interesting interaction after that, where Corin apologizes for fear taking over and him being unable to really be helpful or anything. Rock then says it's okay to feel fear, that's a natural thing, Jedi can't just not feel fear, but the trick is to not let fear fuel them or drive their decisions. Then we see the 3 Path members, including Geth, who has got a shoulder wound, aim blasters at Rock and Corin. So a little bit more information on these 3 Path members. You've got Shalish, who is a human female. You've got Geth, who's the human male who's shot in the shoulder, and Geth is in some sort of relationship with a character called Shia from Path of Vengeance. And then you've got Wole, who is a Rodian male. Rodians are the same species as Greedo. They can be green-skinned or orange-skinned. They come in a variety of colours, but you would recognise them from A New Hope because of Greedo and Han Solo's interaction in the cantina. Now, all 3 of the characters, Shalish, Geth, and Wole, all appear in the Path of Vengeance book that I've mentioned previously, and I will be doing a book review for that in the coming weeks. So back to Sula, Zenith, and Amber. They are in the cargo bay, and there are the eggs nearby, and unknown to them, Sula's connection still feels like there's a damage of her connection to the Force, and it seems to be because they're in a room surrounded by these eggs that they think are gemstones, but obviously they aren't aware of that. But rifling through the medical supplies, Amber gives Zenith a shot. I assume it might be a stim or something like that, from Jedi Fallen Order / Survivor, and then Zenith awakens, but still senses there is danger around them. Then Paco shows up and notes that there is no power left in this half of the ship, electrocuting the leveler took all the power they could. And just to clarify, they keep calling the creature or monster, things like that, because they don't know it's called the leveler or the Nameless. I'm calling it that for yourselves' benefit. So the thuds of the leveler can still be heard around the ship, and Zenith is getting more and more concerned, and then Rock and Corin show up with the 3 Path members, as confirmed that Kane Weequay doesn't appear again. It's confirmed that Geth needs medical support from that shoulder wound, and Rock says that they should help the members of the Path. Now, Paco is resistant, as is Sula to a degree, but they eventually get convinced. The Jedi say, look, we're meant to help everyone, we know they shot us down and they basically caused all these problems, but they are asking for our help, and that is what we do as Jedi. So they all kind of reluctantly assist the Path, even though the Path members are saying, do you think we want to beg you for help and stuff like that? So there's a lot of tension in the air. But the only condition that the Jedi give to helping the members of the Path is that there is no more violence. The Jedi then point to the eggs, which obviously they don't know are eggs, and ask what actually are they, and Wole just says that they are rare gemstones. Sula, Rock and Corin then talk in private, and they decide to keep an eye on the Path because they sense that they are lying about something. Paco then comes up with a plan to turn the engines of the ship on and try and turn them into a bomb. If they overload them and can trap the creature inside, then in theory it would kill them. So the Rodian Wole notes that they know all of the ship's protocols and things, so they can assist Paco in disabling these to make it easier to overload the engines. Rock and Corin confirm they will go into the other part of the ship and try and get some sort of power cable to connect up to the engines so that this entire plan can come to fruition. The Path then questioned about the creature again, and they claim to not know anything about the leveler. Corin and Rock note that Kane said something like the leveler would destroy the Jedi and it's a weapon and things, but the remaining 3 members claim to not know anything about that. As Corin and Rock go off to sort out their part of the plan, Sula decides to join the members of the Path and Paco to go and help turn off those protocols. When they get there is still no power in this part of the ship, so Shalish suggests to use X5's power to turn on the control panel. Meanwhile, Rock is thinking of a plan and decides he wants to distract the leveler, so he plans to run out, make loads of noise, and then as the leveler goes for him, then Corin can take the engine cable in hand and go to the other part of the ship. So they do that, but then the leveler completely ignores Rock and then heads into where the duo came from. So in the side of the hole that Rock cut with his lightsaber, and that's where Sula, Zenith, Amber, and the Path members all are. And then as issue 3 draws to a close, we see that Sula heads out to confront the leveler, while Zenith stands by the doorway of the room where Amber is treating Geth. Even though Zenith can barely stand up, they want to try and protect the injured. But then we see that the eggs nearby in the cargo bay start to crack open. So that's the end of issue 3, so we move on to the final issue of this mini-series, issue number 4. The framing story shows that Ty and Chloe land on this planet they're going to, but Chloe says that the Acklay won't leave its nest for a few more hours, so Ty can continue on with their story. So you've got Paco, Wole, and Shalish are still sorting out stuff on the control panels, removing those safety protocols, and then they can hear the leveler once again, so Shalish grabs Wole so they can run away. Wole is hesitant to go with Shalish, but does eventually give in, even though Paco is protesting, telling them that it's not safe. Then in the cargo bay, Zenith says to Amber and Geth that they must leave because they can sense more of these creatures starting to come out, and we can see that those eggs are cracking even more. Meanwhile, Corran manages to connect the engine cable to the power and then decides we'll then get the others to safety now that his part of the plan has been done. We see that Rock is being affected by the leveler, but it doesn't seem to be right near him, but he is clearly disorientated and his connection to the Force is starting to waver. And then he finds the Rhodian Wole. Just after running away from where Paco and stuff was, Wole is leaning up against a wall, bleeding out near death, and just kind of mutters a few things to Rock before dying. We then see that the power returns to the ship, and Paco manages to remove the last safety protocol and then tells X5 to warn the others because the engines are now set to overload and explode. We then see Sula fighting off against the leveler. I use the term fighting loosely. She tries to confront it, but then loses one of her arms to calcification. She tries to confront it, tries to use the force on it, and her arm just steadily turns to dust. And it is one of my absolute favourite pieces of artwork that I've ever seen. It just looks absolutely incredible. The artistry by Eduardo Mello looks amazing, and the colour art by Ornella Savarese also looks amazing. So I took a photo of it and I put it on my social media so you can see it on there. And I would hugely recommend, like, the artwork of a lot of these Dark Horse comics are absolutely amazing. And just this one page, I think you could frame that and use it in a variety of ways. It could be like a teaser for the High Republic, what do the Jedi fear? It could be all number of things. So yeah, really, really love that page. Then before the levelers can take Sula's life, Paco shows up, shoots a few blasters at the leveler, and the leveler slinks away from Sula. The blaster, however, seems to do nothing to the leveler, and the leveler, who is now quite large with massive hulking arms, smashes Paco into a wall and then escapes. Sula manages to recover, goes over and checks on Paco, but Paco is dead. We then see that Corran makes his way to Zenith, Amber and Geth, and then Zenith warns that there are more creatures coming. We then see Rock shows up, as does Sula, missing her arm, but she says that Paco is gone. Before any of them can grieve or say anything, alarms start to sound and they need to escape this ship. Sula says that she will stay to hold off the creatures and tells Corran to stay strong and ensure that he saves Zenith so the information can be passed on to the Jedi Council. She then tells Rock to make sure that he gets them out of there and then whispers, more so to herself, and look after my Padawan. Rock, Geth, Amber, Corran and Zenith all manage to escape the ship with X5, and we see that Sula goes up against two levelers and she says that today no one else dies, but as she tries to approach them, she slowly becomes calcified and all that is left is her robes and her lightsaber. The ship then explodes and Corran is in absolute tears knowing that Sula was on board. Rock holds him and tries to prevent him going back to where the ship is, and he says that she will be with them always. So that's where the flashback story ends, and then we get a little bit more information from Ty. So Ty explains that Rock took on Corran as a Padawan, and then obviously Corran became a master, took on Sibaba, and then Sibaba became a master and took on Ty. Chloe then mentions that Ty could use some help from time to time, like the people in that story, and then also asks Ty a little bit more about the creatures. Ty says she's unsure if they even existed, and they just became stuff of like nightmares and scary bedtime stories. And Ty suspects that the Path may have just been using some sort of dark side ability that may have done that. She's unsure that the levelers even exist. Then the door of the ship gets knocked on, and Ty goes to answer and Druin is there, calling Ty Master. He says that he heard that she needed some help with an Acklay. She then kind of smirks, looks at Chloe, and accepts Druin, and calls him Padawan. And that is where the comic ends. So if you want to know who Druin is, then you need to check out the Monster at Temple Peak comic. As I said, I tackled that in episode 87 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, so you can go there, find out a lot more information on Ty, the Lothians as a whole, and who this Druin person is. So friends, what have we got coming up? Well, make sure you check out the show notes as per usual because there's details of the various guest spots I've been on recently. I went on Star Wars Timeline to talk about Ahsoka. I spoke about Indiana Jones Kingdom of the Crystal Skull with Tony and Scott in our Comics on Trial episode. So you can check out all that stuff on YouTube, but links are in the description. And also episode 2 of Star Wars Rebels Reviewed is out where myself, Math and Dave in each episode review a season of Star Wars Rebels because Math had never seen it before. We have recorded our 3rd episode as well, so I will be releasing that not this week but the following week, and then we are soon to record our views on the 4th and final season as well, and then we may also do a bonus episode after that as a kind of in-between for Star Wars Rebels and the Ahsoka series, but we'll delve into that when we get there. Obviously, to support me or find out what I'm up to, you can follow me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and on TikTok. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Genuine Chit-Chat. That's where everything is in playlists. That's every episode of Star Wars Comics in Canon. That's a lot of my collaborations I've done. And that's all my episodes of Genuine Chit-Chat as well. And a lot of the Genuine Chit-Chat episodes, especially recently, have got video to go along with them as well, including my conversation with Cavan Scott and with George Mann and a few other Star Wars related individuals as well. And then what's next on this show? Well, I've got the Quest of the Jedi one-shot comic to tackle, as well as the High Republic Comics Volume 2, which I need to tackle as well before we delve into Path of Vengeance, because they're both set before that. I've also got the Edge of Balance President manga to delve into, the High Republic Adventures Comics Volume 2, and I think I'm getting the rest of those in the next week or two, so I'll be able to sort those out as well. And then I can delve into Path of Vengeance to kind of wrap up Phase 2 of the High Republic. So I think I'm going to focus on the High Republic as we go forward. In 1 week, I think, either not next week or the week after, one of those two I will be releasing Star Wars Rebels Episode 3, so that may end up being instead of an episode that week, because it's just where I'm really, really busy, so I may not be able to record a full episode of this, edit, and release that kind of stuff. So for the coming weeks, you'll have another episode of Star Wars Rebels reviewed, it'll be the third one, as well as more High Republic content. As I said, I'm trying to get all the High Republic content finished before we delve into the third phase of the High Republic. I believe Phase 3 is kicking off in, I think it's October. It might be September, but I think it's October is when Phase 3 all kicks off. So then if I can get all of this finished sort of by early September-y time, that means I can then focus on all of these Star Wars comics that are set between the Hidden Empire crossover event and the upcoming Dark Droids crossover event, and then hopefully I'll be somewhat up to date as we get towards the end of the year. I've also got the second volume of the Yoda comics to delve into, as well as the hyperspace stories from Dark Horse, which are anthology stories, as well as the free Comic Book Day High Republic Adventures comics, which are more so around Phase 1. And then, of course, there's obviously the IDW Publishing Clone Wars Battle Tales comic that I also keep threatening to do as well. But that's a general idea of what I've got going on in the coming weeks and things. Obviously, check out Genuine Chit-Chat for loads of non-Star Wars related content, as well as some of the Star Wars interviews too. But that is going to be enough from me, my friends. Thank you so much for listening as always. I appreciate each and every one of you listening all the way to the very end. You can support me on Patreon or Ko-fi for bonus content, including Star Wars Legends book reviews and loads of other great things for as little as £1 as a one-off payment or as a monthly payment. You can get all kinds of incredible benefits from doing either of those things. Details are in the description. But friends, I'll talk to you next week, and as always, may the Force be with you. The intro for Star Wars Comics in Canon is arranged by myself, Mike Burton, and the backing music was made by Eric Matias of soundimage.org.
You have just experienced host, creator, everything elser of Genuine Chit-Chat, and also the host and creator of Star Wars Comics in Canon, found on the Comics in Motion podcast, Mike Burton.